I'm delighted to be here, and when you hear about all of my accomplishments, just remember that I am now 42 years post-PhD, and if you stay around long enough, you do lots of things. The talk I'm going to give today is actually derived from the article that was just published in the Journal of Economic Perspective, but it's much more policy-oriented. And being an administrator at America's private colleges and universities today is fraught with challenges. To name but a few, our nation's financial meltdown in 2008 and the accompanying Great Recession has dramatically increased families' financial need and led to increased financial pressure on financial aid budgets. Reductions in endowment and in annual giving have put even more pressure on tuition at a time when potential students, parents, and public policymakers are all exhorting institutions to hold down college costs. And then high unemployment rates for college graduates, coupled with increasing debt levels, have shifted students and policymakers' focus from getting a college degree to getting a degree in a field that promises higher earnings. And this puts pressure on private colleges and universities with large arts and science components to defend the values of a liberal arts education. Now, I often begin talks I give on higher education by saying that I know from my own personal experience as a Cornell vice president, as a Cornell trustee, and now as a trustee of the State University of New York system, that it's much easier to write about issues involving higher education, as I do, than it is to actually have the responsibility to administer and lead a higher education institution. And I also know it's much easier to be a higher education leader in good times than in bad times, but who our leaders are in bad times is much more important than who our leaders are during good times. So given all the challenges that private colleges and universities now face, I want to begin my talk by expressing my admiration for administrators who are leading institutions such as Marquette during this very difficult period of time. One of the things I learned as an administrator is that faculty members never say thank you. They say, what can you do for me? So I want to say thank you to the administrators. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to discuss the stresses that American higher education is under, the changes that we have seen taking place over the last 3 decades, and many of these changes predate the Great Recession, so I guess I want you to think that these problems are more structural. They're not just due to an economic downturn, and we're not going to just bounce right back. I'm going to talk about how private academic institutions have responded to these changes and how they might respond in the future. And a takeaway message that I hope you will get is that I believe private institutions such as Marquette have a unique advantage relative to the public sector counterparts because of the differences in governance structure and financial models under which the private institutions operate. And then finally, I will conclude by speculating a bit about what the future will hold for all of higher education. So let's start out talking about what's been happening to private higher education. And of course, the first thing is, why does tuition keep rising? During the last 3 decades, undergraduate tuition levels increased each year on average by 3.5% more than the rate of inflation at private 4-year academic institutions. And this, in fact, was approximately Marquette's experience as well. The comparable increases for public 4-year and public 2-year institutions were 5.1% and 3.5% respectively. Tuition increases in private higher education have been associated over this period with increased real expenditures per student. In public higher education, as I will talk a little bit more below, at best tuition increases have helped to compensate for reductions in state support. So when tuition goes up at private college and universities, students get more. When tuition goes up at public higher education institutions, they're paying more, but they're getting less. Now, I have extensively discussed the forces that cause private and public undergraduate tuition levels to continually increase at rates exceeding the rate of inflation as measured by Consumer Price Index elsewhere. For private institutions such as Marquette, they include the aspirations of the academic institutions. I like to use the analogy of Cookie Monster from Sesame Street. Cookie Monster is this Muppet. I'm not sure whether It's a he or a she Muppet. And Cookie Monster just has one objective in life, and that objective is to find as many cookies as he or she can find, stuff them in his or her mouth, and eat them. And private colleges and universities have but one objective, which is similar to the objective of any nonprofit organization. They want to be as good as they can on every dimension of their activities. We want to have the best faculty. We want to pay competitive salaries to hire great faculty. We want to have the best students. We want to have financial aid to attract the type of students we want, either need-based or merit-based. We want to have the best facilities. We want to have the best student support service. You name it. We want to be the best in everything that we do. And this drive to be the best, this competition among academic institutions is what has made higher education in the United States so great. But it comes at the cost of money, and so tuition increases is one way we get the money. Now, the second thing that matters is that there are perceptions by students and their parents that where they go to college is almost as important as whether they go to college, and the belief that higher-priced private institutions confer unique educational and economic advantages on their students, and this leads to long lines of applicants applying to these institutions, and thus there are only limited market forces to hold tuition increases down. And the behavior of these highly selective private institutions, and there was a story about them actually in today's New York Times. How in the world could they all go back now to increasing tuition by 4.5% to 5% a year, which is what they've all done this past year. This behavior by these institutions provides a cover for other private institutions to raise their tuition. So I guess I'm saying that other private institutions sort of serve as followers to what the most selective, wealthiest institutions are doing. A third thing is the belief in the importance of small class sizes, and that the essence of high-quality undergraduate education is small class sizes and a lot of personal interaction between faculty and undergraduate students. And this has made it difficult to achieve productivity gains and cost reductions. And a little bit later in the lecture, I'll give you some data for Marquette on the share of your classes that have less than 30 students in them. Published rankings such as U.S. News and World Report, which are based partially on institutional expenditures per student. Okay? If an institution increases its expenditures by student at a slower rate than its competitors, let alone if it holds expenditures per student constant or cuts expenditures, it's going to go down in the rankings. And as I've shown in research, when an institution goes down in the rankings, lots of bad things happen. Fewer students apply. The students that you offer admission to are less likely to accept your offers, so you have to offer more people admission, which makes you look less selective. The SAT scores of the student body go down, and you have to give more financial aid to get the student body. So although administrators may tell you they don't pay any attention to the rankings, I have to tell you they're lying, and they do pay attention. And then the growing use and cost of technology. When we completely wire the campus or install tiered classrooms or PowerPoint and video and whatnot, these things improve the quality of higher education, but they cost a lot of money. And these quality changes are not reflected in the increase in our price. And this is in contrast to when the price of automobiles goes up and the Bureau of Labor Statistics computes what's the inflation rate in the auto industry. They take account of quality changes. We don't do that in higher education. Now, all of these factors hold for public higher education, but for public higher education, the other factor and the most pressing one is the cutback in state support. So one big change is continual increase in tuition. The second big change is that the nature of the faculty has changed. The percentage of faculty nationwide that is full-time has declined from almost 80% in 1970 to only about 50% today. And the vast majority of part-time faculty do not have PhDs. So fewer full-time faculty, more part-time, more non-PhD faculty. At Marquette this past fall, 76 of the faculty in arts and sciences and 50 7% of the faculty university-wide were full-time. The percentage of full-time faculty not on tenure tracks has more than doubled between 1975 and today, increasing from about 18.5% to almost 40%. And at Marquette last year, you've done a better job at maintaining the tenure and tenure track status of full-time faculty. Only about 30% of the full-time faculty at Marquette were not on tenure track lines. I have a spy in the Institutional Research Office who was kind enough to provide this information to me. So as a result, today nationwide, only about 1/3 of the faculty teaching in American colleges and universities are full-time, and tenure are on tenure track. So the nature of the professoriate is changing. People like me are dinosaurs. There aren't going to be a lot of us around in the future. I said, well, wait a minute. Why did this change in faculty composition occur during a period of time that tuition kept going up by so much more than the rate of inflation? And one reason is that the tuition that we charge doesn't really tell you what we collect from our students, because it doesn't tell you anything about the grant aid that we're giving back to students. The tuition discount rate, the share of each tuition dollar that institutions return to their undergraduate students in the form of need-based or merit grant aid, increased substantially at private four-year colleges during the period. For example, the average tuition discount for first-year full-time students at private four-year colleges such as Marquette reached 42% in the fall of 2008. The comparable figure in the fall of 1990 was 26.7%. So basically, much of the tuition revenue that we're getting at full-time at private universities is increasingly going back to attract students. It's not providing revenue that the university can use to fund other operations. And the vast majority of tuition of undergraduate financial aid dollars come largely from tuition revenue. It's only a handful of the very wealthiest private universities that funds other than tuition revenue provide grant aid for students. I will tell you, my own university, which you might think is wealthy and has an endowment of about $6 billion, over 80% of our financial aid dollars are recycled tuition dollars. It's only the really richest, the Princetons, the Harvards, the Stanfords, and the Yales, which most of their financial aid comes from endowment income. So why is it that the institutions dramatically increased their financial aid? The wealthiest and most selective privates have no problems achieving their desired enrollment levels. They dramatically increased their financial aid during the period, partially in response to evidence that relatively small fractions of their students were Pell Grant recipients coming from relatively low income and lower middle income families, to the rapid growth in their endowments, which caused the U.S. Senate Finance Committee to investigate them and threaten them with raising or establishing minimum payout rates for endowments unless they dramatically increased financial aid, and so they did. And then because of the decline in family income and asset levels after the financial collapse of 2008. So many of the wealthiest private institutions, the one that have just announced that they're raising tuition by 4.5% to 5% next year, they're giving back at the margin half of each of their tuition dollars that they raise to undergraduate students in the form of grant aid. Other private institutions which use need-based and merit-based aid to craft their classes and achieve desired enrollment levels found that market forces do matter. Competition from lower-priced public institutions, along with stagnating real income levels during much of the period, and then the decline in family incomes and assets after the financial collapse, dramatically increased the need of other privates to increase grant aid, and so that's what happened with the other privates. And in public higher education, as I've already mentioned, tuition increases have barely offset a long-run decline in full-time equivalent support per student. So, for example, state appropriations for full-time equivalent student in public higher education institutions in fiscal year 2010, so that was 2 years ago, averaged $6,454 per student. At its peak in fiscal year 87, the comparable number in constant dollars was almost $8,000. So support per student in real terms has declined by 20% since 1987. Even if you leave out the Great Recession and say, what about if you look at fiscal year 2008, which occurred before the Great Recession, it was still lower per student than it was 20 years earlier. So basically, public higher education institutions have raised tuition, but it did not generate more revenue for them to spend on students. It was just to offset reductions in state support. Now, there's another factor that is responsible, and that's how institutions allocate their resources. And the share of institutional expenditures going to faculty salaries and benefits in both public and private institutions has fallen relative to every other expenditure category, including student services, academic support, and institutional support. Some observers, typically faculty observers, have attributed these changes to administrative bloat and the declining influence of the faculty on expenditures, on decision-making at universities. There is a book by my former colleague Ben Ginsberg from Johns Hopkins University which makes this argument. There isn't a lot of data, there are a lot of war stories in it, but he's a political scientist, so I expect that. I apologize if I insulted any political scientists. He's a non-quantitative political scientist. However, my own research suggests, and this is sort of with a paper that I did with Doug Weber that appeared in the Economics of Education Review in 2010, that student service expenditures have an important positive effect on persistence and graduation rates, especially at institutions whose students have lower entrance test scores and that have proportionally a large number of relatively low-income students. So I would be very cautious about the notion that we should try to take the meat cleaver to reduce student service expenditures. Now, after experiencing the financial collapse in 2008 and the Great Recession, many universities have hired external consultants to advise them on how to reduce their administrative costs and are taking serious steps to do it. By the way, this is a great business. There's one company, it's Bain Consulting, different from Bain Capital, but Bain Consulting. And it goes to the University of North Carolina, it tells the University of North Carolina what to do. Then it comes to Cornell, it tells Cornell what to do, charging a second large fee. Then it goes to Berkeley, tells Berkeley what to do, charging another large fee. This is a fantastic business model. Keep selling the same information over and over again to different people. I don't know how they get away with it. But anyway, at Cornell, we are well on the way to reducing our administrative costs in Ithaca by $75 to $85 million a year. And this may sound like a lot of money, but that's only 5 to 6% of our base operating budget once we exclude external research funding. And I have to caution that even if we succeed in achieving reductions of this magnitude, this is going to be a one-time reduction. And unless you can continue to hold the costs down and maintain the discipline, the administrative costs will keep increasing. And that's a serious problem which administrators face. When conditions are really bad, they can take actions which anger everybody. But when things get better, it's much more difficult to keep your foot on the brake. Now, as a trustee of the SUNY system, I'm very proud of the efforts that our system of 64 institutions is taking to reduce administrative costs by centralizing activities where possible, so things like purchasing, library acquisitions, information systems, to take advantage of economies of scale, and by pushing campuses to achieve efficiencies by sharing back office functions, such as registrar, human resource, and finance across campuses. And we actually have 3 campuses now, or three pairs of campuses, where we are trying to put one president for a pair of campus, because what we have learned is that unless there's a president that tells the campus you have to share functions across the campuses, nobody is going to want to do this. And all of these efforts are being made to devote the increasingly scarce system resources to our core education and student service missions. Over the last 4 years, the state appropriation per student at the SUNY campuses has been cut by 30%. And that's not on too many nuts. That's typical of many or some other public higher education systems. Now, of course, campuses do not have to be public, and they do not have to be part of the same system to both achieve economies of scale in purchasing and to share back office services. So one notable example, which it turns out Marquette is part of, is the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities Collaboration Project. Since 2002, this project has organized and administrated more than 35 cost-saving programs and back office functions. And I don't have an estimate of how much they have saved members, but perhaps you would find it on their webpage, including in the area of employee benefits and technology infrastructure. And furthermore, the core the core academic mission of higher education is also an area that is ripe for a collaboration. The founder of my university, Ezra Cornell, and his great-grandson, who is also named Ezra Cornell, is currently on our board of trustees, is famous for having said, "I would found an institution where any person can find instruction in any study." But the reality of Cornell, and even more so for smaller private institutions, is that it is impossible for any institution to find the resources to fully staff any area of study. Now, institutions in close geographic proximity have long realized that sharing academic resources is a way both to hold down costs and to improve access to curriculum for their students. So, example, in the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts, students from Hampshire College, Amherst College, Mount Holyoke, or Smith College, and the University of Massachusetts can take any class at any of the other 5 institutions. And similarly, in the Philadelphia area, students in the Tri-College Consortium, Bryn Mawr, Haverford, and Swarthmore colleges can take classes at any institution. And the sharing of academic resources in each of these consortia is facilitated by the provision of bus service between the campuses. At lunch today, I asked some of the students whether you can do that here at Marquette, and they were sort of ambivalent about whether or not they're able to do that. But there are a number of other institutions in the area. And modern technology also permits the sharing of academic resources between institutions that are not even located in the same geographic area. So I've told some people I teach a class each fall on the economics of the university. It's a great class. Simultaneously using two-way compressed video of the internet to Cornell students in Ithaca and then our Cornell in Washington program, which is over 300 miles away. And several years ago, to demonstrate how resources could be shared across institutions, I similarly simultaneously taught my class to Cornell and Binghamton University students. Sort of, professor, not a lot of money, can't make big donation, I'll donate back my teaching services. Another example is a virtual classics department called Sunai Kisses, which was originally founded in 1995 by a set of classics departments at small liberal arts colleges. And none of these departments had more than 3 or 4 faculty members. It's a small liberal arts college, classics, not a big major. And so that greatly limited the range of classes that any one institution could provide to its students. But through the use of synchronous and asynchronous technology, students from multiple colleges can now take classes at any of the member institutions, and the range of course offerings available to students at each institution has dramatically expanded. And then a final example is something called the Online Consortium of Independent Colleges and University, and this is a consortium of over 80 institutions hosted by Regis University, and this basically allows institutions to provide online courses and to subscribe to online courses offered by other member institutions in a wide variety of these areas. Now, all of these changes are occurring at a time when American higher education is facing extreme pressure. There was a wonderful book that was written a few years ago by Claudia Golden and Larry Katz from Harvard. And in this book, they stress that our nation's economic growth and prosperity during the 20th century was driven by our leading the world in terms of the share of our students that had college degrees. But other nations have overtaken us. It's not that our educational performance has declined. We just haven't kept increasing. And today, we are only 12th among 36 developed nations in terms of the share of our young adult population with college degrees. And furthermore, the groups in the population that are growing the most rapidly, people of color and people from relatively low-income families, are the groups that historically have been underrepresented in higher education. So improving access to higher education and persistence to college graduation for members of these groups, and for that matter for all Americans, is essential for our nation's prosperity in an increasingly international competitive world where economic growth is based upon knowledge. And concerns that high rates of tuition growth will prevent us from achieving our goal, coupled with a decline in income and assets that families are facing due to the Great Recession and the collapse of the housing markets, are putting pressure on public and private higher education institutions to limit their rates of tuition increases. Now, I want to talk about some specific problems that the publics are facing. You might say, well, wait a minute, this is Marquette. Why are you talking about pressure on the publics? Because I want you to see that the pressures that the publics are facing, I believe, confers a unique advantage on your type of institution. So why do I care so much about the publics? I care so much about the publics because 75 to 80% of all American college students are educated in public higher education. So in a real sense, the future of our nation's education level depends much more on what goes on in public higher education than it does in places like your institution and my institution. We can make efforts, but we're not going to greatly expand enrollments substantially. Expansion enrollments will come from public higher education. But these institutions are being asked to expand enrollments and improve persistence and graduation rates at the same time that their state support is continually being cut back. And because of the pressures that they're facing, much more attention than in the past has been directed to relatively low-cost two-year colleges in recent years, both by the Obama administration and the states. And in 2009, 54% of all first-time freshmen at public institutions and 40% of all first-time freshmen nationwide were enrolled in two-year colleges. Not all of the people enrolled in two-year colleges are on tracks, even the full-time people, on tracks to get academic degrees, but that's where a large share of full-time freshmen are enrolled. So public higher education systems are working to improve the flow of students from their two-year to four-year colleges. Strategies that they are using include common course numbering across institutions, explicit articulation agreements, dual admission programs, so you're admitted to both the two-year and four-year institution as a freshman. You start at the two-year and then you automatically go to the four-year without having to apply again. And providing much more detailed information on which two-year college classes fulfill both general education requirements and requirements for specific majors at different four-year colleges within the system. Now, perceptive leaders of private academic institutions should realize that growing enrollments at public two-year colleges are an opportunity for them to compete to enroll graduates of colleges who seek four-year degrees. Smith College in Massachusetts, for example, has long had articulation with a number of two-year colleges around the country, the most prominent being Miami-Dade. And by the way, the University of Wisconsin-Madison has articulation agreements with Miami-Dade. Also, the former chancellor, John Wiley, who was a friend of mine, told me this is the way they achieve some racial diversity on the campus. A number of other private academic institutions are actively involved with support from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation to expand their enrollment of graduates at community colleges. And to take another example, the Public Community College of Philadelphia has dual admission programs with 11 public colleges and universities in the area. So I don't know what Marquette's policy is towards transfer students. I don't know the extent to which there are a lot of two-year college graduates in the Wisconsin system. But if I was an administrator here, I'd be trying to steal those. Students. Now, pressure is also being put on the publics through calls by governors and the state legislature for their higher education systems to use faculty resources more efficiently. In Texas, data have been published showing the revenue generated by each faculty member at each public university. Reports based on these data show the number of student credit hours taught by and the external research revenue generated by each faculty member, and then contrast these to the salary and benefit costs of the faculty member. I shudder to think what would happen if someone did that at my university. So such accounting methods give no weight to the quality of what is delivered to students in the classroom. They just say educate more people at lower cost. And if seriously used by decision makers, would provide an additional incentive for public academic institutions to increasingly substitute adjuncts and full-time non-tenure track faculty for tenure track and tenured faculty members. Now, this pressure being placed on the publics may prove to be an advantage for private academic institutions such as Marquette, which are seriously concerned about the quality of the education that they provide, and believe that in the main, quality is enhanced with small classes and a large share of tenured and tenure-track faculty. And I would note, because I have this information, that in 2010-11, 57% of the lower division classes here and 69% of the upper division undergraduate classes had class sizes of less than 70. I told the students at lunch today, my senior elective capstone class at Cornell has 70 students in it. So you are doing something right in providing the small classes, especially for advanced students. A considerable body of research, including work that I did with a former student, Liang Zhang, which appeared in the Journal of Political Economy in 2005 or 2006, showed that on balance, tenure track and tenured faculty enhance persistence and graduation rates of students at both 2-year and 4-year institutions. So places like Marquette should be constantly emphasizing the quality dimension of your students' experience and how your persistence and graduation rates compare to those of the publics whose student profile is similar to yours, because you're going to see that your graduation and persistence rates are higher. Now, another problem faced by the publics is they're being asked to serve as engines to enhance employment and tax revenue in their states. They're facing pressure to produce graduates in fields that will yield higher earnings and hence higher tax revenues for the state. But by the way, if I was an economist, and I at least used to be an economist, I would distinguish between the governmental budget effects of a program and the social effects of the program. And focusing more tax revenue, that's the governmental budget effects. That's not necessarily what's in the social interest. Florida's Governor Rick Scott, for example, has taken a position that state appropriations to Florida's public higher education system should focus on educating students in fields that will lead to more highly paid employees, such as math and sciences, rather than in the humanities. Now, the earnings of graduates should be considered by public funders and by students contemplating college study, but it's not a trivial task to match up how the earnings of college graduates compare to their majors. For example, applicants from business, law, and medical schools, 3 professional programs that historically have offered the high promise of high earnings for graduates. I say historically because the law schools no longer offer that promise, and if the dean of the law school is here, he or she could comment on that. They're not required to have math or science undergraduate degrees. Moreover, there are many socially important occupations such as nursing, social work, and teaching, all occupations, by the way, for which Marquette offers preparation, that offer college graduates relatively low earnings. And if one values degrees in a field only by the earnings of graduates, one runs the risk of underproducing trained people in these important fields. So as an economist, I certainly believe that money matters, but it's not the only thing students should be thinking about in making career decisions. and that the states should be thinking about in making funding decisions for their public institutions. Indeed, as Nan Cohen, the former president of Duke, has asserted, a strong case can be made that the liberal arts education is the best way to develop critical and integrative thinkers, productive and creative employees, committed and compassionate citizens, and happy and healthy human beings. You could tell that I graduated from a liberal arts college. So in the years ahead, private higher education institutions such as Marquette, you will face pressure from parents and potential students to provide education that will lead to future employment prospects, but you will not feel the additional pressures that public institutions will feel because of their relationship to their states. And assuming that the trustees of your institution share your views about the importance of liberal education, you will have much more freedom to make this case to potential students than your public counterparts will have, and you should take advantage of this thing. Now, there's one last change that I haven't mentioned, and that's the growing for-profit higher education sector and increasing use of technology. Today, about 10% of all students, primarily adult learners interested in education leading to careers, attend for-profit institutions. The largest players in this field, including the University of Phoenix, have been among the leaders in restructuring how education is delivered through the use of technology to improve learning and to reduce costs. They have also been among the leaders in reducing reliance on tenured and tenure-track faculty. They don't have any tenured and tenure-track faculty. In seeking to measure learning outcomes and evaluating instructors based upon what their students learn, the older faculty in the room, including me, shaking. Notable efforts from the nonprofit sector to restructure methods of delivering education include the work of the National Center for Academic Transformation and the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University. Now, the NCAT and Open Learning Initiatives have taught us through rigorous evaluation designs that it is possible to use information technology to simultaneously improve learning outcomes and reduce costs in a variety of types of academic institutions and a variety of types of introductory and remedial classes. The NCAT efforts focus on replacing lectures with interactive computer-based learning resources such as tutorials, exercises, and frequent low-stakes quizzes, as well as individual and small group activities. Other points of emphasis include designing classes around mastering a set of learning objectives, which is a big focus of the for-profits. At Cornell now, we have to put down the learning objectives for our classes because accreditors require us to do that, and that's almost an impossible task because what I have found from my own personal experience is very few of us understand why we are teaching what we are teaching. So it's actually good to force us to do this. There's a lot of provision of on-demand help to these students in computer labs or online, staffed by a mixture of faculty, graduate assistants, peer tutors, or course assistants. And a lot of the cost reduction that they achieve come from the reduced reliance of costly full-time faculty. And the NCAT approach allows institutions to leverage their best teachers most efficiently. While the advantages of this approach may not be obvious to private higher education institutions such as Marquette that do not have a lot of large classes, once one thinks about pooling resources across institutions, including those for course development, the NCAT approach may become more attractive. So I'm going to conclude by just making a few speculations about the future of higher education. Many of us will bemoan the golden age of American higher education, which actually coincides with the years of my career. I have lived in the golden age of American higher education, with its heavy reliance on tenured and tenure-track faculty. However, higher education is not immune to economic forces. The pressures that public and private colleges and universities face to expand enrollment, to increase graduation rates and to limit future cost increases will likely only exacerbate the decline in full-time tenure-track faculty. Increasingly, academic leaders realize that how we teach our students must change, especially for remedial and introductory classes, and that technology must be employed to improve learning outcomes and reduce per-student costs of delivering instruction. Now, I'm not noted for my ability to forecast the future, but actually I was fairly accurate in tuition rising, so let me give it another shot. I'm very proud of that. The leading private liberal arts colleges and the wealthy private flagship research universities are in a world of their own. They will have the resources to maintain full-time tenured and tenure-track faculty. They will increasingly employ technology in introductory level classes in an effort to expand active learning and to reduce costs, but in their case, much of the cost savings will be directed to enhancing the quality of upper division classes and furthering the research enterprise. And this essentially says that at the research universities, tenured and tenure-track faculty increasingly are going to specialize in research. At the research universities, the use of full-time, non-tenure-track faculty will likely continue in increases. For at least some new PhDs, the combination of the pay level at these institutions, their relatively low teaching loads compared to other types of institutions, the low or non-existent research demand placed on full-time, non-tenure-track faculty, the possibility of multi-year rolling contracts, and the attraction of working at a large university with bright students will suffice to keep these non-tenure-track positions effective. I have one student who was a tenure-track professor at Centre College in Kentucky, which is a top 50 U.S. News and World Professional Arts college. His wife hated living wherever Centre is located. I think it's Centre, Kentucky. He now is at the University of Rochester as a lecturer, making 80% of the salary of a full-time assistant professor in economics, which means he's making almost twice as much as he was making when he was at Centre. He has a 3-year contract which is automatically renewed each year, and he says to me, I'm the happiest faculty member at Rochester because I don't have any pressure to do research, I just do what I want. So these full-time tenure-track faculty positions at the research universities may be attractive things. And at other academic institutions, and I believe including Marquette, for financial reasons, an ever-increasing share of faculty will not have doctoral degrees and will not be full-time on tenure-track lines. The use of technology and people in non-faculty positions, such as student assistants who do all the administrative work in the course, to reduce cost and increase learning in remedial and introductory level courses will likely occur much more rapidly. And as the share of full-time tenured and tenure-track faculty dwindles, the group will inevitably play a lesser role in the governance of these higher education institutions, which is something that really makes all my friends at the AUP very unhappy. For all academic institutions, pressure for accountability surely will increase. Academic institutions are being asked to provide information on assessing student learning outcomes as part of the accreditation process. There is a recent wonderful book by Aram and Rosker that concluded that very little learning actually occurs in higher education for a large proportion of American students. And so it's ARUM and ROKSA, so you could Google that book. And as such, one might expect to see increased pressure, especially in remedial and introductory classes, to evaluate faculty, at least partially, by their students' outcomes, as the for-profits do. This is horrible. I mean, I can blame my students' failings on them, but in the future, my students' failings can be blamed on me. This is horrible. And this is going to put additional stress on faculty administration relations and faculty governance, especially at public campuses where collective bargaining contracts may specify faculty evaluation. Now, the final point I want to make is my concern about the future of PhD programs. Most students who enter PhD programs do not do so for the promise of financial rewards. other professional schools and alternative careers often promise higher annual earnings. Instead, students considering a PhD, especially those not considering degrees in science and engineering fields, have historically done so with a dream of becoming a tenured faculty member and then pursuing a career of research and teaching while participating in the governance of an academic institution. However, obtaining a PhD has already become a less attractive option in many fields, lengthening times to degree, low levels of completion nationwide. Maybe I shouldn't tell this because I don't want to discourage students. This is average figures. Low levels of completion in the range of 50 to 60%, and the low levels of tenure-track hiring in the academic job market really discourages. And as the share of faculty positions that are non-tenure track and perhaps not full-time either continue to increase, along with a high fraction of part-time positions staffed by faculty without a doctorate, this will likely further discourage American college students from going on for PhD study, and that sort of is another talk. Is it sort of a problem if the share of our students receiving PhD goes down? So I actually have a little more on in the talk, but I think I've gone too long already, so let me stop, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or nasty comments. Or